We'll ask to record. Anyway, a couple of different topics that we were hoping to cover on the workshop. And our first topic is actually the friendly neighborhood gopher, our Richardson's ground squirrels. We've got Karen Wickerson from Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation's the expert here to talk a bit about ground squirrel control and some of the management. So I think I'll turn it over to you, Karen.
Great, thanks, Kathy. I'm just going to minimize this and bring this up. Sorry. Share my screen here, get my cute little gopher up. There we go. And I assume you can hear me okay?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Okay, thanks. So just a bit about me. Kathy gave my title. I'm the rat and pest specialist for the government of Alberta. I mostly focus on the rat control program, so I oversee that for the province, but I also do Richardson ground squirrel control and as well coordinate the coyote predation management program for the province as well. I'm a registered vet tech. I've worked in a rural mixed animal practice. I've now worked for the government for almost 13 years and 4 years in this position. I took over for Phil Merrill. I don't know if anybody out there knew Phil. He was a great guy, but yeah, he taught me what I know about rats. For the presentation today, I'm going to cover Richardson ground squirrel life cycle, reproduction, and then go over options for control, chemical, non-chemical. And I realize a lot of you may know something or a lot about ground squirrels out there, but hopefully I can offer you some new information and facts on these guys and how to control them in my presentation. So I'll just talk about some facts on these critters. Like I said, we'll go over the life cycle and reproduction, the control. And then I'm also at the end going to talk about the strychnine alternatives evaluation that we were able to participate in with Saskatchewan Agriculture in 2022 and 2023. So these guys, they were actually a few interesting facts about them. They were named back in 1820 by John Richardson. He named them after himself, obviously. They have many different names: prairie gopher, yellow gopher, flicker tail. I've heard Dakota rat, but most commonly we call them gopher. They are a major source of food for predatory birds and mammals and reptiles, certainly in Alberta. And they are listed as a nuisance under the pest and control regulations, which means that people may choose to lawfully shoot them, trap them, or remove them on their own property if they want to. And they can also give permission for other people to come on their property to do so as well. So the difference between that and a pest, like a Norway rat or say a roof rat, is they are labeled as a pest, so people are required to control them. Whereas with a Richardson ground squirrel, you can choose to control them if you want to. A couple of interesting facts about them. I guess over 100 years ago, Manitoba offered a 3-cent bounty on them. And I'm sure if you calculate, inflation to current day, that they'd probably be worth a little bit in today's market. And Alberta at one point gave out free poison for them way back in 1911. I don't see that happening again in the future, but I just thought that was interesting. Now a bit about their life cycle and reproduction. We'll talk about the males first. So usually they're the ones that we see appear really anytime now. We're into the last week of February. It depends every year on how warm it is and of course where you are in the province. These guys don't eat too much at this time. They're fighting for their territories. So they're living off their winter body fat at this point. Excuse me. And they are also, some interesting things about them is they seldom live to be 3 years of age. And they also form no social associations at all when they're above ground, or below, I should say, as well. And I'll go through their hibernation, their life cycle. I have a slide coming up. But as far as the females, they generally emerge 2 weeks after the males. So we'll see them come up here in the next week or so. They breed immediately and do not eat much at this time. But then 2 weeks after they breed, they start feeding heavily. What's interesting about the female Richardson ground squirrel is they're only fertile for 2 hours, one afternoon a year. So one day each year is when they mate. And when they do mate with several males. So litter average size is 6 to 8 young. And within that litter, there can be a couple different fathers. Females live generally 4 to 6 years. Their home range during the summer months is usually 20 to 40 square meters. And females rear the litters by themselves. So the males are not at all involved with the raising of the young. And something interesting about them is that apparently they can recognize their kin throughout their life. So even after hibernation, so whether it's siblings or even some of their offspring, they apparently do recognize them again. This diagram illustrates their life cycle above and below ground and when the age and sex classes are all active at the same time. So like I said, you can see the adult males come out mid-February, they go underground mid-June to hibernate. Adult females come out approximately early March, and then they go underground about early July. The juvenile males and females both emerge at the same time. And the females are out until about early August, and then the juvenile males go underground about mid-October. And that explains, why they don't have a long life cycle. They're out a longer period of time, so more chance for predators to get them or cars to hit them. And then you can see then there is a period of a few weeks there where all of these groups are active at the same time, kind of late May to early June. And so the optimal time of here to control them, of course, is really once the females emerge, kind of that early March area. So kind of early to mid-March to the middle of April really is the most ideal time to control them so that you can take out those breeding adults. Just kind of more to summarize their life cycle. They spend most of their time underground, obviously. They hibernate, and I'll talk a bit about that. They are strictly a daytime rodent, so 3 peaks of activity. They don't, if it's really hot, one of those 30 plus hot days in the summer, they don't generally come out that 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. period. They'll stay underground because it's just too hot. And then the adult females, generally when they own a burrow system, it's 3 to 5 exits if it is a new burrow system created that season. And when I said the males are not involved with the rearing, the females do not let the males into the burrow system at all. The burrow system that they give birth to and raise their litter in. And then the burrows kind of range in size. They can be anywhere from 12 to over 40 feet in length and between 2.5 to 8 feet deep. And then I mentioned hibernations. They are obligate hibernators. So regardless of the temperature outside or how much food they have access to, they hibernate every year. So they start to begin bouts of it in late summer, and then these bouts increase in duration as the soil temperature gets cooler. And when they go into hibernation mode, it's like a torpor state, they call it. This is where their body temperature decreases, their heart rate, and also their respiration rate. And that's all to conserve energy and keep those fat reserves up so that they will last all throughout their hibernation in winter. Now we'll just get into talking about control. So when we're talking about controlling the damage a pest causes, the damage should be managed through an integrated pest management program, or IPM is how it's most commonly referred to. IPM is a decision-making process to manage pests. The objective of any field rodent control program should focus on protecting land or crops from rodent damage with proactive or preventative strategies, rather than the wholesale killing of rodents. You're never going to be able to take all of the ground squirrels out. A good effective IPM program will take out about 80%. So these are some of the points to consider for with an IPM for field rodent control. Benefits and damage. Treatments that have the least amount of interference to the environment or crops to achieve an acceptable level of control. We share the environment with other humans, animals, and birds, so it is important to consider the hazards that a treatment presents. If there are species at risk in your area, you have to make sure you know what critters are living on the land when you take into consideration what you are choosing as a control method. And what treatment is the most effective of your time? So treatments later in the season, May to June, require more time and effort than earlier in the season because there is a larger Richardson ground squirrel population at that point. The juveniles are out. And you also have to make sure that they are compatible with agronomic practices. So you need to think about what treatment works well with the crop you're growing or the pasture you're looking to control the rodent in. The reasonable success can be achieved at protecting cropland using a variety of strategies as an alternative to poison. So as I mentioned before, when you're using a rodenticide, we want to remember we share the environment with many other mammals and birds and ourselves. And we want to make sure we use control in a way that reduces risk to non-targets. So we cannot rely solely on lethal poisons as our only form of control, with changing societal values regarding the use of poison. And as we have seen with the deregistration of strychnine, we cannot rely solely on the use of poison as a means of control. And I'll just talk a bit about here what some options are for non-chemical. And as well, then I will go through on the chemical side, all the rodenticides that are registered for Richardson ground squirrel control. So non-chemical, there's shooting and trapping. And of course, this can be time and labor intensive. There are also land management practices. So things like cleaning up grain at seeding, don't leave any spilled grain out. Like that's just a buffet, an attractant for the Richardson ground squirrels. What is your tolerance of predators around on your land? Because, badgers, coyotes, foxes, raptors, weasels, they're all predators of ground squirrels. If you can keep the vegetation tall around your crops and also along the fence line, that will encourage these predators to want to be in the area to hunt the ground squirrels. And I just, my next slide will be on the birds of prey nesting platforms. I do like to mention something about those. But just getting into the chemical control, what we have available. And if you aren't aware, strychnine is no longer, we're not allowed to use it. It's not legal to use. The registration ended, which means our use of it ended March 4th of 2023. So that was, we're coming up to just a year ago. People, as of March 4th of last year, people were not able to use it anymore. The PMRA, or Health Canada, the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, had a 3-year phase-out period for that product. As far as what options that we can still use, that you can still purchase and are registered for ground squirrels, Rosal is one. Now, Rosal and Ramet Green I have there, they are both anticoagulants. So what that means is they are a multi-feeding product. So they have to have more, the ground squirrels have to feed on the product more than once. The Rosal is a ready-to-use product, and the Ramet Green it's not as attractive to the ground squirrel because it's more like I want to say a kibble, but something similar to that. So it's not on a substrate like oats, which is what Rosal is on, or the zinc phosphide products when I talk about them. So yeah, once green up starts, if you placed Ramet Green out, the ground squirrels definitely would not be interested in it. And as far as the zinc phosphide products, now, a lot of people are more interested in them. They have been calling me and asking me about them over the past couple of years with the phase out of strychnine. They are a single feed product like the strychnine. So definitely people have been more interested. It hasn't been readily available, but over the past couple of years, I know that more kind of feed supply stores have been getting it in because people have been asking about it. So it has a strong pungent odor, which is garlic-like. And this, sorry, I'm referring to the zinc phosphide products, the ZP rodent oat bait, and then the burrow oat bait. So yeah, so apparently the strong garlic flavor that it emits attracts ground squirrels. And what happens when the product is exposed to moisture, it releases phosphine gas. So what happens is the Richardson ground squirrels ingest the product and it reacts with their stomach acid and it results in their death basically by asphyxiation. So it is a fairly quick death. And another good thing about the zinc phosphide product is it's not stored in the muscle or other tissues of the poison rodent. So you have a very low risk of secondary poisoning with it. Then I will talk about, and I'm going to talk a bit more about zinc phosphide in the strychnine alternatives evaluation too. The fuzz toxin, this is aluminum phosphide and it's a fumigant. You do need a special applicator license to use this product, and it is very highly toxic to humans, birds, and animals. And then Rocon is also registered for use for Richardson ground squirrels. So this actually isn't a toxicant. It is a foam made out of white mustard seed. So you do need special equipment to I guess, use or apply this product. You spray the foam into the holes of the burrow and essentially the Richardson ground squirrels drown from it. So, and I know that there is a company in Alberta that does sell that. And I'll just move into then, I always like to talk about the artificial nest poles, pest control on a pole. I think that's a great way to sell it. What I find interesting is that one pair of nesting hawks can consume up to 500 ground squirrels in a single nesting season. So, you know, a pair of hawks would be very effective ground squirrel control. It really depends if you have the right location. Things to be considered are trees. It's good to have them around trees or cliffs, and you don't want to put the poles close to human activity, so such as roads or power lines. And you definitely want a large, healthy population of Richardson ground squirrels. And of course, you cannot use poison then if you're going to build pest control on a pole and encourage a set of hawks to nest. There is information if you Google. There's some good information on the internet about that, but I do also have information I can send you. And I put on here, Equus at one point, they did have a program for installing poles. I know they're not in every area of the province, but just something to consider. Maybe your local electric company might have a similar program going. So just to summarize and go over the most effective time to use rodenticides, it's really kind of that March 15th to April 15th time of year before green up. So, and again, do not bait at the first sign of Richardson ground squirrel activity in the spring. You need to wait a couple weeks for those males to finish fighting it out and then the females to come up after mating. And as I said, you don't want to bait before green up because those lovely green shoots that are going to come out of the ground are going to be much more attractive for the ground squirrels than anything you put out, for a toxicant. Pre-baiting, I didn't mention this. With the zinc phosphide products, it is recommended to go around and pre-bait with just oats, untreated oats. You can put that in the hole in the ground in the active holes. And then when you go to actually do bait with the zinc phosphide product, it should help to increase uptake of the product from the ground squirrels. Burrows have several entrances, so you do not need to bait every hole, and they recommend a baited hole should be about 5 meters apart. And of course, much like us, we like fresh food. And so Richardson ground squirrels do like when they are served moist, fresh bait. Now I'll just talk a bit about the strychnine alternatives evaluation. Bit of a disclaimer here. As I mentioned, we did it in conjunction with Saskatchewan Agriculture. Dr. James Tansey there, he pretty much wrote up the trial and then kind of told us what to do, how we should do it. And then we gave him all the data we collected. And then he came up with the results, which I'm going to show you. So disclaimer, I'm not a statistician, but I'll walk you through the results of it. In Alberta, we did it in Willow Creek, and that is an actual photo on the right there of Kirby and Gary in 2022 when we were setting up. And I will mention what happened with the weather. But we did include in the evaluation strychnine, even though it technically wasn't registered last year. Dr. Tansey was able to get a permit for us to use it. We also trialed the two zinc phosphide products I've mentioned, the burrow oat bait and the ZP rodent oat bait. And then we did trial the two anticoagulants, Rosol and Ramecrine. And we also did have a control plot. So basically we had 3 separate areas within the municipalities that the staff of Willow Creek had chosen. And at each site, we had a plot, a 40 meter by 40 meter plot for each of the products I listed off, as well as the control. We did set up a camera as well. We had 2 game cameras set on a central post in the middle of each plot. And the purpose of that really was to see if there were any non-targets at all. We did do a 2-day pre-treatment baseline count of the Richardson ground squirrels. So as well as going around after we did the treatment every day for a period of time, we counted how many ground squirrels were above the ground 2 days before we started treatment. So that's that baseline count. And then I was going to mention a bit about the weather. So in 2022, we had a typical spring day down in Willow Creek. I mean, you're in the foothills. There was a fair amount of wind, but the sun was out, as you can see, and it was, fairly warm, maybe close to 10 degrees. But within 48 hours, when we went out and put out the treatments, the weather changed. So in came the cold front, in came the snow, and then the temperature greatly decreased. So you can imagine the Richardson ground squirrels did not want to come out for our evaluation. Now I've included here just 2023. So as I said, the weather did not cooperate in 2022. So I didn't include those results because they weren't significant enough. But you can see here along the bottom, we have all the treatments that we did, including the control. And then along the vertical axis, you can see the survivorship. And what that means is really the number of ground squirrels that were counted. So as you can see here, the strychnine was in Alberta here the most effective for control. We had similar results basically for the Ramecrine, the Rosol, and the burrow oat bait. And then for Saskatchewan, for the results, they were a bit different. You could see that the strychnine and the 2 zinc phosphide products for both years basically were as effective. And so they had a weather event in 2022 that delayed the start of theirs, but they did have good results for both years. And the good thing, Dr. Tansey as well, in this graph here, you can see he did an economic analysis and figured out the cost per treatment per acre. And as you can see, the burrow oat bait and the ZP rodent oat bait were the most economical treatments, certainly compared to the strychnine, and the Rosol, yes, was a bit more. And with the Rosol and Ramecrine, keep in mind too, you may have to put out more applications as well. So just to summarize that. And I just want to say too, more information is on the Saskatchewan Agriculture website. Dr. Tansey wrote up a bit more on the evaluation. So, if you just wanted to Google the Richardson ground squirrel evaluation, Saskatchewan Agriculture, you'll be able to find it very easily. And yeah, just to wrap up, I just like to include a couple reminders when you are using toxicants and pesticides. You need to always read and follow the label directions and make sure you wear or use the appropriate personal protective equipment that is recommended. If you do use bait stations as opposed to putting the product directly into the burrow holes, you always need to make sure that you label those bait stations with the name of the product and the pest control product number, and that it is poison. And as I mentioned, you need to keep in mind a good baiting program will never get more than 80% of the Richardson ground squirrels. So no matter how hard you try, you're probably still going to have a few at the end. Timing is always the key to control. You don't want to put that bait out too early, and you don't want to wait until, end of April into May. At that point, you've got many more ground squirrels that you're trying to control, and it's going to take a lot more work. And always pick up and dispose of carcasses appropriately. And that's it. I can take any questions. People are welcome to even email me directly, or certainly take my name and call me as well.
We do have time for a few questions if anybody wants to just jump on and ask. I know, Karen, there was a question in the chat about strychnine and, how we can use it.
Yes. Yeah. And so, like I said, the registration ended last year, which means the last day we could use it was March 4th of 2023. And I should mention too, I know Clean Farms is going to be having a cleanup next summer. So if you have anything old that, pesticide or toxicant wise, you'll be able to take the products there when it happens. Mm-hmm.
I guess just one question here. So if you've already got hawks on a location, then you still have a little bit of, I guess their gophers are still kicking around. There's no other way to incorporate poison into that without risking the hawks.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, good question, Eric. And I don't see how you could without, without possibly, poisoning the hawks. Did you have some right now?
Yeah, we've had I guess a nesting couple of red-tailed hawks that have been on our property for probably like 3 or 4 years.
Oh, and great. And they are fairly effective?
Yeah, they made a second nest this year, so I'm not sure if they're moving but just down the fence line.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's great. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, some people have had success with that.
Have there been any, I guess, use of burrow builder poisoners in the area? Do you know?
I'm not sure what you mean by burrow builder. Like,
it's kind of like a single shank and a coulter, and then it creates a burrow, an artificial burrow, and you kind of grid your field with it, and it deposits the bait subsurface.
oh, okay. No, I'm not familiar with those. I'm not sure how they would fall in line with the label, what the label says for baiting. But I'll keep my ear out on those. So that is interesting.
How far away are your hawks from civilization on your property there, Eric? Like if you're on a farm or an acreage or whatever, are they close to your house, your barn, or are they quite a ways away from the main yard?
They're maybe an eighth of a mile away from the yard, but they're maybe 200 meters off of main range road.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of in a pickle for doing anything like that because I'm just off of a main highway and the biggest population of gophers is less than 100 yards from my yard site, so I'm kind of limited to what I can do. So
Yeah, we had a power pole upgraded and we took the power pole and also put it out there in the field, and it it definitely noticed a drop in that area because they'll just come and sit on it, and the gophers seem to move away.
okay, thanks. Yeah, I know there are eagles about a mile, approximately a mile south of my place, but I don't see them around my property very often. But I know they are close, and you don't see much around that area.
And we've also had like one coyote that it seems to be just a lone actor, and he'll just follow me around while I hay and just eat whatever happens out there. So I don't know.
Hi. Hi. I don't know if I have to put my hand up or not, but I did. How high are those poles that that are in the ground for putting a nest on?
I can look up the information, Joanne, and send it to you. I have like a little brochure that was put together,
Okay,
if you would like.
I'd like the brochure if I get one.
Would you mind putting your email in the chat, or you might be able to send it to me directly?
With gophers being diurnal, I'm assuming that owls really don't have an impact on them.
Yeah, I don't know. I think most of the hunt owls are hunting most, it would be at night, and gophers would be underground at that point, sleeping. Good thought, though.
Noticed that Gail had mentioned that they ended up getting some weasels in at their place, and that had an impact on, she said, both the gophers and the hawks, although I suspect it's, if you take out the lunch for the hawks, they'll move on. What about weasels and some of the other predators?
Yeah, so weasels definitely are certainly a predator as well. Badgers, but badgers of course cause a lot of damage. Can cause a lot of damage in crop fields, but apparently they go through and they will eat the gophers in the winter. So that's while they're hibernating. I've read that. So if it's an area where you can tolerate them, like I said, it's all about tolerance, right?
I have badgers at my place, and it makes me leery when I'm out checking the cows. Not when I'm walking through, because you'll see the dirt just flying a mile in the air from them digging down. So I just stay away from them. But I'm hoping they're getting the gophers. That's what I want. Did my email come through there?
It did, Joanne, and I'm just going to say, if there's anybody else who would like me to send them the information on the nesting platforms, how to build them, and the information on them, certainly please, if you want to put your email in the chat, you can send it directly to me and I can do it right away.
Any more gopher type questions for Karen?
Do you just want the email in the group chat, or to send to you individually, or how do you want it?
Yeah, if you just want to send it directly to me, Wayne, that's fine. Yeah. And
Okay.
I'm going to email him right away.
See if I can figure out how to do that here.
Well, if there are no other questions, and we can, will be some time at the end, we can also move on and do some questions there, but might as well move on to Shelley. Shelley Barkley is the Alberta Agriculture's insect technologist and quite an expert on some of our pest insects. And so happy to introduce Shelley and let her tell you about some of her top 3 challenges that she's predicting coming up as well. So thanks, Shelley. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. And I'm sure this won't be quite as riveting as gophers. I mean, Richardson ground squirrels. Okay. All right. Are we good, Kathy?
Yeah, you should be good now, Shelley.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about some my top 3 insects plus 1. When Kathy and I were talking about a title for my talk, I was in Mexico, and so my brain wasn't really functioning, and I came home and I went, oh, there's one more we should talk about. So I just snuck it in there. Before I get too far down the road, I can't do this program by myself. And I count on all these people to help me. So whether they're building forecast maps for us, answering grasshopper questions, or if it's your ag fieldmen who are providing data for the grasshopper survey, this work cannot be done alone. So I just want to recognize these folks. So this is probably number 1 on all our minds going into 2024. And so I'll spend a fair bit of time tonight talking about grasshoppers. So the picture there is the MD of Willow Creek doing the annual grasshopper survey, which is done sort of the last week in July and pretty well through August. And your fieldmen go out and they will count the number of grasshoppers hopping out of a 1 meter square in the ditch. And they will do that 5 times. And they make sure they step about, 10 or 20 paces in between each one. So they're not counting the same grasshopper over and over and over. And then the second part of that is that they actually do a sweep net of the ditch. And they do that back at their point of origin or across the road. And that just tells us which grasshoppers are there, and not all of them are pests. So it's important that we siphon that out. So the map you're going to see with the grasshopper forecast in it is created with 2,200 lines of data. And that means that the fieldmen of the province have done 2,200 stops in every township where there's agriculture in the province. So a big hats off, because that's a lot of work for them. So we have 5 pest species of grasshopper in Alberta, but up in the Northeast, you really run into only 4. The 5th one tends to be one that's more down here in the South, in the sandier soils where it's easier for that one to make a living. So the first one, and this is one we've all seen probably all the days of our lives. This is that big beefy 2-striped grasshopper. It has those 2 stripes that start right behind the eye and go all the way down to the tips of its wings. Interestingly enough, this thing doesn't like to fly, and it would sooner walk, but it will fly if you try to scare it out of the ground. But yeah, they would sooner walk into your field for sure. And when we talk about what they eat, they'll eat just about anything. Some of their favorite things are lentils, where they'll do pod clipping when the lentils are a little further along. But yeah, that is a picture of one in a canola field, and you can see she's eating the pod, and she's stripped the bark off some of the stems. So yeah, they'll just eat anything. This one is Brunner's, and Brunner's tends to be more of a alfalfa and canola specialist, and you can see it's done a pretty good number on that canola bark there on the little branchlet. And these things are about, I'm going to say, 1.25 inches long. So they're a smaller grasshopper, but push comes to shove, if they want to, they'll eat your wheat and barley too. They're not too picky. Now we're talking migratory. Migratory will eat absolutely anything and everything. So in years when they're really, really bad, they will eat all the green crops that you can think of. If they would stay eating pepper grass and their weed species like downy brome, we'd be really happy. But they actually have to move in and eat, like I said, everything. And when they're really bad, they'll eat the needles off the spruce trees. They'll eat dead bodies of insects on the ground. They'll scavenge on the ground. And like Richardson's ground squirrel, when you see them on the road eating their dead buddies, these guys will do the same. They will eat their dead grasshopper partners. And they'll also eat dried manure patties. So they're not very picky on what they eat. And this last one is clearwing. And clearwing tends to be a specialist of grasses. And so wheat, barley, and you know, your hay crop. If push comes to shove, they'll move into canola and feed on canola, but they would prefer grasses for sure. So let's talk a little bit about grasshopper development. So in the spring, the eggs start to hatch, and the eggs they wiggle up out of the ground. And at that stage, they're covered in a membrane. And so it's very hard for them to hop around or stand up straight. But so they're very able to be preyed on by ground beetles and other things because they can't run away. But once they get out of that membrane, they start their very mobile life. They go through 5 instar changes, which means they split their exoskeleton, because all insect skeleton is on the outside of their body. And so they split it and they come out and they're a little bit bigger each time. The other thing that happens is those wings grow a little bit more every single time they molt or go through an instar change. And after the last one, of course, their wings are out full, and they then will fly or move into food and start feeding. And the females, it takes them about 2 weeks before their bodies mature and the eggs mature inside of them. And then it's really kind of cool if you're a bug nerd like me. They will dig a hole in the ground, and they will line it with a spray foam that they create from their body that looks a lot like what we put around holes in the house to keep the field mice out of our house. And she will lay her eggs in that spray foam, carefully put a top of spray foam on the top of the pod, and then carefully put little pieces of soil back on the pod to protect it and backfill the hole she's created. And then it takes her about 3 days before she can produce another pod. Now, a grasshopper female, a 2-striped female, has been known to lay up to 600 eggs, but about 300 is the max for most grasshopper species. And pods, the number of eggs in a pod will depend on the grasshopper. So 2-stripe might put 50 eggs in a pod, whereas clearwing probably only puts 20 or 25 in a pod. So she waits 2 or 3 days, and then she can lay another pod of eggs. And they can lay from 4 pods to 25 pods in their lifetime. And these pods are about, I'm going to say, 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches deep in the soil. So they're kind of protected by the soil. Okay. And once she lays the eggs, the embryos start to develop in those eggs right away. And depending on the species, depends on how far embryo development happens. So in two-striped grasshopper, they will develop until they're about 80%. They will move along until they're about 80% developed. So it's a miniature grasshopper in the egg. Clearwing, on the other hand, only matures to 50%. And then they go into a diapause or a rest stage. And they will stay in that rest stage now until spring temperatures bring the soil temp back up to 10 degrees C. And then they finish that last little development and come out of the ground, and the whole cycle continues again. In Alberta, our pest species, we only have 1 generation a year, thank goodness. So this is the map from 2022, and it's important that I show you this kind of history of 2022. You can see that, yeah, we had, light to moderate infestation. But when this map was produced, I was really surprised that we weren't more in the orange and red zone. From what I was reading on social media and what agronomists were telling me is how bad it was out there. But the survey did not really tell that. But we knew that grasshopper numbers were building, and the area in the province they were covering was getting bigger. Okay, so now let's go to 2023. And this tells us the story, right, of what we saw and heard in 2023. I was getting calls from the Fieldman and Willow Creek because they were even having ratepayers having problems keeping grasshoppers out of the gardens. The gardens were disappearing, the crops were disappearing. It was pretty intense down in the south for sure because of the drought and the heat, which favors grasshopper development. But when I talked to Kathy and a couple of the agronomists from Vermilion River, they did say to me that there was some spraying that went on for grasshoppers on the northern side of your municipality. And you can see that there was some orange zone and a little bit of, there was a little bit of orange and a lot of yellow up in that dewberry country up in there. So what I'm going to tell you now is that scout early and scout often for grasshoppers. As a producer, you probably know where they're bad on your farm, and that's where I would start, is where they were bad. And start about the long weekend in May. And that's basically what all you can do is just start. Just because you're in that 0 to 2 zone, that green zone, don't discredit the grasshoppers and make sure you're out there looking for them. It'll be important, I think, in 2024. So now why are we at where we're at with this huge, what seems like and feels like a huge population? Well, let's cast our minds back to 2022. That summer was warm. It was a beautiful summer, and we had a beautiful long fall. So grasshoppers have been building prior to 2022. Quietly, their numbers have been increasing and increasing. And so then we have this beautiful August and September. So grasshoppers were able to lay every single egg their body could possibly lay. And they were also then able to develop to the maximum stage of development before they entered that diapause. Because 2022 was the first time in the history of my working in this program, and that's been in 14 years, that I've finished soil sampling for wheat midge on the 20th or 30th of September, because usually it's not until after Thanksgiving were done because of rain and backwards weather. But you guys were able to combine straight through, and we just rolled for the survey, and grasshoppers just rolled laying their eggs. So now fast forward to May of 2023, and we were hot, above normal temperatures, and we were dry, and both things that favor grasshoppers. But what happened is, because we ramped up our heat so fast in May, the soil temperature was able to get up and get to that 10 degrees, and grasshoppers were finished that last little bit of their diapause and came out of the ground. And they came out of the ground 2 weeks earlier than is known in recent history. I've talked to people that have worked in grasshopper research for 35 years, and they've never seen them that early. So what that meant was that we had adult grasshoppers in mid-June, and then that meant that they were laying eggs come the 1st of July. So now we're set up again for it could be bad, because we have grasshoppers with lots of eggs in the ground, and they have matured to the farthest stage that they can develop before they enter diapause, because once again, we had a beautiful, beautiful fall. So people say, well, remember, it got down to minus 45 for a couple days in January. Well, yeah, it did. But that was air temperature. The soil temperature has to drop, and that's where you'll get some egg mortality. And it has to drop to minus 15°C. And if it drops to minus 15°C, we've got other problems other than killing grasshopper eggs. So if you have snow on the ground, then that acts like a big soft duvet, and that helps them stay warm too, helps the soil temperature stay up. The further the grasshopper is developed along that development stage thing, the better their survival. So the bigger they are, or the further along they are, the better they survive. Heat will take them out. Plus 35 will kill 50% of the nymph population, but we rarely see that. Plus 35 days for 2 days in a row. I don't want another heat dome. That was not fun. And the nymphs, grasshoppers are smart enough to move out of the heat. They can move into the shade. Adults can easily tolerate 38 degrees C. And what they do is, when it gets too hot, they just move into the shade of the grass or down in the bottom of your crop and wait till the temperature warms and cools down, and then they go back to feeding. We have to remember they're a native insect. There isn't anything they haven't seen, and there isn't anything they haven't adapted to. And when she lays those eggs, she's going to find spots that ensure the survival of her babies. So she's going to lay the egg pod close to plants, so that when the plants get frozen and the green material then falls over and insulates the ground. So they're well adapted for what's coming at them. What we need is for our natural predators to ramp up. So we need blister beetles numbers to start to grow, so that they will take some of those eggs out, because they're an egg feeder. Bee flies will start to take them out. There's a little tiny wasp that'll lay her eggs in the eggs of grasshoppers in the ground. And there's a tachinid fly that actually lays her egg on the grasshopper adult, and it eats the grasshopper from the inside out. But with any of these parasitoid predator things going on, it takes them a while to ramp up. So you'll get a ramp up of the grasshopper population, and then you'll get a ramp up of the predators and parasitoids, and it may take a couple years. But what would really help is if we could get some fungal pathogens working. And I'm not going to try and say that, except I'm going to call it E. grilli. This is a fungal disease that helps to kill insects. And so there's a subspecies of grilli for each grasshopper species, and grilli also attacks other insects, like say root maggot flies. But basically, what this fungal disease does is it causes the grasshopper to crawl to the top of the plant. It wraps its arms tightly around the top of the stem of the canola or your wheat, and it dies there. And then we get a rain event or a wind event, and it drives the spores out of the insect down onto the ground, or the insect falls to the ground, and that's how the disease overwinters. The problem is that we haven't had enough free moisture in our air. We haven't had enough humidity the last 2 years that favors this kind of fungal growth to happen. So E. grilli has been given credit for taking out grasshopper populations. And I've seen it in fields where it's taken out grasshoppers, but you know, across the province, we just need some rain and we need some humidity. So here are the thresholds, and you can find this information if you Google Alberta Ag, Sask Ag, or Manitoba Ag, because we all work together. You can find this information out there, and that will tell you, you know, that'll give you your starting mark to know when you should be spraying. Try not to spray before you reach threshold, because you'll take out those predators that we're hoping would start to build to help us manage this population. These are your products that will work for control. Okay, it's listed on the label. This is not my wheelhouse. I can't really speak to the insecticides. So I would recommend you talk to your chemical salesperson or your agronomist to get some good information from them. I stole this slide from Dr. Tansey, so because he wears more than one hat in Saskatchewan. So that kind of wraps up my thoughts on grasshopper, but here's the message: scout often and scout early, because two-striped grasshoppers normally are out around the May long weekend. That's when they start to pop out of the ground. And yeah, so there you go. The other one that you guys should probably be thinking about is wheat midge. So there's a picture of the adult. It's a tiny, tiny, bright orange mosquito-like creature. And that is the larva on a wheat kernel or in a wheat flower. It's been peeled back. So basically what she does is she runs up and down your wheat heads when your wheat is flowering, and she sticks her ovipositor in there and drops one or two or three or four eggs in the flower. And those eggs develop into these little bright orange maggots, which then suck the life out of the kernels of your wheat. So the kernels in picture B are sort of the damage you'll see, where you'll see where their mouth parts had hooked in and they have dehydrated the wheat there, and they cause shriveling. And often when you go to the grain elevator, they'll mark your grade down and they'll say you've had frost damage. And you as the producer know you probably haven't had frost damage, but it's probably these things. The kernels in C, you rarely see because they're going to go up the back end of your combine, and you won't know that you've had this issue. So this is our survey from 2023, and we go out and we take soil out of fields, less than a liter of soil, and I bring it back to Brooks and I wash it through a series of sieves, pick out the midge that are in that soil sample, and then we send that information to be mapped. And so you can see that this would be Vermilion here, right? Vermilion River. We did find a less than 600 midge per meter squared in a couple of fields, but realize that when we're sampling and surveying there, I do 6 fields in Vermilion River. So that there's no way that is telling what everybody's field is going to be. I kind of do it in segments in the county. So I try to get the best coverage across your county. So here's the message. Oops, never discount wheat midge, because they have the ability to spend time in the ground. So they'll diapause for at least one season before they have to emerge. And they like conditions like moisture in May and June, which will force them to then pupate, and then they'll come out of the ground. So that's why I say never discount it, because in the Northeast, you guys have a history of having wheat midge. And so they could be there just lying in the ground waiting for some rain to come at the right time. So you want to be ready to be out scouting for them. Now on our webpage, and I have a link at the back of the presentation, we have a map there that explains when wheat midge has emerged from the ground. And so that allows you to plan your scouting adventures. It doesn't tell you about economic thresholds or anything like that, but it just tells you that now you better be out scouting for wheat midge because they've emerged from the ground. And it gives you some time too, because the male midge come out of the ground about 4 days before the females, and they just hang around in the wheat waiting for the females. And of course, your wheat is most susceptible to wheat midge from boot crack until the end of flowering or the end of emphasis. Now you can find wheat midge all summer long in a field, but they don't do any damage after the wheat has finished flowering. So this is the +1, pea leaf weevil. So we go out and we evaluate fields from Warner to the Peace River. And what we're looking for is this notching on the edges of the leaves. So you can see here, and that's how we evaluate the amount of damage. So you're not concerned about what's happening to the leaves of your pea plants, because peas can really recover well from severe feeding. What you're worried about is the nymph or the larva of the weevil, which actually destroys the nitrogen producing nodules on your roots, because they'll go in there and they'll eat everything out of the nodule on you. So when you look at economic threshold for pea leaf weevil, you look at that notching on the clam leaf, and you're looking for 30% of your plants have notching on the clam. And that helps you decide whether you're at economic threshold. Okay. So this is our survey from 2023. And so from Sedgwick to Athabasca on away to the border, it looks like that's going to be the pea leaf weevil hotspot from at least in 2024. And it probably will be the pea leaf weevil hotspot from now on. Okay. All the research that was done on controlling pea leaf weevil and its effect on yield was done in southern Alberta on those soils that aren't nearly as full of organic matter as they are up in you guys' neck of the woods. And so in the south, the recommendation was easy. If you are farming and growing peas south of Highway 1, you seed treat, because seed treatment will help protect your yield. But we know that soils with good nitrogen levels in them can help the plants recover from the feeding damage from pea leaf weevil. So without solid research, and it's being done now, but that's not going to help you know what to do in 2024. When I talk to researchers, the answer and ask them, Do we recommend seed treatments? What they're saying is if you're growing faba bean in that region in the Northeast, then yes, a seed treatment will definitely help protect your yield. Now on field peas, they're not quite as sure. And so when I got a final answer from somebody, it was that yes, you should seed treat in the orange areas, but research has shown that in soils with high nitrogen levels, the plants are more likely to compensate. So what I've kind of been, when farmers have been asking, what I've kind of been saying is, let's kick it down the road until 2025, the decision, because seed treatment is your most effective control for pea leaf weevil. Kick it down the road to 2025. See if you are at thresholds in your fields, and then make the decision next year when you need to do seed treatments. If you need to do seed treatments, and then maybe we'll have a solid answer for you also at that time. Know that foliar spraying for pea leaf weevil is not effective because she has the ability to lay at least 500 eggs. So you go out to the field and you see notching on your clam and you make the decision that, yes, I'm going to spray. So you go to town and get your spray, you come home, you fill the sprayer, drive to the field. And by that time, she's already laid eggs in the field. And so your spraying will make you feel okay, like you got some revenge on pea leaf weevil, but the larvae, the eggs are still there. And you might have taken out some predators that would be eating the pea leaf weevil eggs. So that's why seed treatment is recommended. And wow, in your area with those beautiful soils, I would kick it down the road, but that's up to you. The last one I want to talk about is cutworms. And this is another one we don't want to turn our back on at all. So I have an online reporting tool for cutworm feeding, and I would beg you, if you have cutworms in 2024, to fill out this form for us. It gives us a long-term data set, for one thing, which allows researchers, when they're going to get money for doing research projects, say on cutworm, they have some data to go to their funding agency to say, okay, this really is a thing. And then it's easier for them to get funded. The other thing is it lets people know within the region that they need to be out and looking for cutworms in their fields. Your privacy is guaranteed because we blur it out to 4 townships, so nobody's going to know whose field it is, but it sure helps us in knowing. Last year we had 32 reports of cutworms, but I know there was way more. There was, because agronomists were telling me, well, I'll put in one field, but I think I visited 20 today that had cutworm damage. I am somebody who learns by seeing and doing. And so Williams tiger moth is in the group of cutworms. And in April of 2018, I got fortunate enough to visit this field with Norm Fleury before he retired. And this was a winter wheat field, went into winter beautiful, 80 acres of winter wheat. And in April, the farmer drives by the field and goes, oh my gosh, what's happened to all my, what's happened? So Norm and I spent some time, we drove this field and we found the carcasses of cutworms that had molted into the pupal stage. And this little cutworm had moved in from native pastures on the south side of this field and over that ridge. And there was 5 acres left of an 80 acre field. So the thing was that April of 18 was like one of those backwards Aprils that we can have here. And it was cold and it was nasty. And people are thinking, well, it can't be insects out eating because it's so cold and nasty. But you have to remember, these things overwintered as larvae, so they have built-in antifreeze. They can so they can adapt to those cold night temperatures really quite easy. It's easy for them. And down on the ground, they're out of the wind, and so they're not getting that same feeling that we get on our face, because our face is 5 and 6 feet above the ground. And so they're quite happy to be out there eating. And so that's that was my learning moment, was that you need to be out scouting, and you need, if your crop isn't coming up right, you need to be out looking. And Scott Mears always told me when we were looking for cutworms that a field that had peas in it might be a likely candidate for the next cropping year, where there would be maybe cutworms, because they prefer to lay their eggs in it, because peas come off earlier than everything else. And that's probably a place you would start looking for them, in whatever crop went after peas. So to share this information and to build these maps, this is sort of what we do. We're in up to 240 pea fields before the 6-node stage. We're in 325 to 330 wheat fields, and we're in 240 canola fields, although I didn't talk about canola tonight. So how can you help me do my job? If you have a wheat field and you're interested in knowing if you have wheat midge in that field, I would come and I'll sample the field, and I'll send you back your results in December, so that if you need to plant a midge tolerant wheat, you have the information that will help you do that. We'll come and count your pea fields. We don't enter your pea field at all. We work off the field edge. If there's a nice rock, I'll pick the rock and bring it home to my landscaping projects in my yard. But other than that, we don't take anything out of the field. And of course, we'd ask for anyone with cutworms to report their cutworms, because it helps us all just be better. So the blue QR code is how to a fast link to the Alberta Agriculture's Alberta Insect Pest Monitoring Network page, where you'll find the live feed maps for Bertha armyworm, down and back moth, wheat midge. You'll also find these static maps that are the forecast maps for 2024 are there. There's reporting tool links, and there's also links to all the information we have in Alberta Agriculture about insect pests. And the green one is how to get a hold of me, and drop me an email. I'd love to talk. So with that, stop share. There we go. So if anybody has any questions, I kind of will probably overtalk my time. I tend to.
Anybody have any questions on some of the insect problems that hopefully maybe we'll get the right cool wet spring to manage?
No kidding. Probably conditions we don't want to have to seed, but yeah, cool and wet would sure help with the grasshoppers. Make a little disease cooking stuff happen.
Do you have any info on those annoying little red maple bugs people are calling them? I'm not sure that that's what they're actually called, but
Well,
any info on how to get rid of those bloody things?
okay.
Because they are everywhere around us right now, or not right now, but you know what I mean. Last
Yeah,
year.
I know what you mean. So you're right in my wheelhouse, because that's where I started with Alberta Ag, was talking about insects and trees and shrubs. And so maple bugs, of course, feed on the seeds of female maple trees. And so the best thing for the maple bugs, and probably the worst thing for your shelter belt, would be to remove any female maples. So you remove the feed source. But There isn't any good chemical recommendations for this thing. Know that their brains are pretty tiny, but they know that they want to be inside where it's nice and warm. So try and make sure your house is as sealed as you possibly can. And just know that they're not really harmful. They're just a really nasty, nuisancey thing. So a vacuum cleaner works pretty good in the house. But yeah, there's not really any good chemical controls for them. Vacuum. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. No,
But
that's fine.
you know, I can share with you that in our office building, you can see daylight under some of the doors. And so we have quite a population of maple bugs in our office. Yeah.
Oh, good. They'll explode this spring for you then, and they'll really be everywhere.
We're really happy when they accidentally crawl in the walk-in freezers, but yeah. It is a rite of passage in the fall, for sure. And then any Chinook days, they're there again. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that this winter too in my shop and in the garage and stuff like that. They come out as soon as it warmed up even a little bit. So
Yeah. So sorry, no good control there.
okay, well, thanks anyway.
I'm actually from the special areas. We noticed with the grasshopper population, they tended to stay away from peas more. They really went after the lentils.
Yeah.
Anything that was bordering peas really got hammered, but the peas didn't. Is there a reason behind that?
It might have been the species of grasshopper, right? Because there's one that just does not like pulses. But migratory and two-stripe will actually be in your lentils and can cause pod clipping, which you probably maybe saw. And apparently they can even open the petals of the flower and eat the pod out of the flower before the flower is finished even. So yeah, I'm you know, I will, Wayne, I will find that answer, and if you drop me an email, I'll talk to Dan Johnson about that one. I suspect it might be who the grasshoppers were, but I'll talk to Dan. I remember going to Oyen in 2002 as a communities in bloom judge, and I got out of the car in Oyen, and man, they were in my hair, and they were so thick on the bumper of the car, and in the grill it smelled like barbecued yuck. So yeah, you guys have seen these things before for sure.
Yeah, that's actually I'm just 20 minutes south of Oyen, so a lot of my fields actually have grass headlands.
Yeah.
So the grasshoppers stayed in the grass and didn't really affect my crop too badly. There was a couple like around the sloughs, they started to creep into the crop. So we just we did the dry chemicals. Like we went out with spreaders and just did instead of a full spray, we just did the spot kill of baiting, I guess is what you call it.
Yeah. You know, Scott Mears, who was my boss for years, said he was going to retire before the next big grasshopper outbreak, and he retired in 2020. So I think he did it. Kathy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. It said my space bar would unmute me, but it decided it wouldn't. Are there any other questions for Shelley.
I guess I have one more too, and I'm not sure if anybody can answer this or not, but I have some trees in my yard, in the farmyard, that have the black clumps in the branches. And I've heard that that is bugs. I've also heard that it's disease in the tree. Is there, since you're kind of on the insect topic, do you know anything of that? If it is insects or if it's
So-
more disease?
So Wayne, do you know what tree we're talking about?
Oh, I have a few different kinds, but no, not overly. I'm not really too
Okay,
too knowledgeable
so
with those type of trees. So.
so if you want to if you want to take a couple pictures of the damage you're seeing on the trees, and email me, we can talk.
Sure.
I'd love to help you. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds
Perfect.
good.
I'll look forward to the email.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so our last speaker for tonight, well, I guess first we did have a bit of discussion in the chat, just asking about the rat situation in Alberta. And so I think after Hannah's presentation, we'll let Karen talk a bit about rats. But I think first we'll stick with our agenda and move to Hannah McKenzie. Hannah is our wild boar and pest specialist with Alberta Agriculture. And she gets to talk about the big pests tonight.
Yeah, I think we just went up in size significantly from the grasshoppers. So yes, I'm going to talk about wild boar in Alberta, and I guess my goal tonight is to hopefully share some interesting information with people, and not take too long so that there's lots of time for questions, so everyone has a chance to ask if there's something I didn't touch on that they're interested in, to ask about that. So just talking first a little bit about the name. Wild boar tend to be called all sorts of different things. And it can potentially mean something that's informative, but the basic thing is that they're all the same species. They're all Suscrofa. The Eurasian wild boar, which is what people often think of as the classic wild boar, it looks very classic. That's the ancestor of all our current domestic pig species. So you can see that on the left there. And then on the right is some examples of domestic pigs. And these are some of the breeds that often get confused for wild boar and get reported. And then because these are all pigs and they can interbreed, you end up with sort of the whole gradient with a bunch of hybrids as well between Eurasian wild boar and our domestic breeds. So you can see at the top there in the top right corner, there's just a little some diagrams that sort of help you see the difference. The body shape is really quite different between the Eurasian wild boar and our domestic breeds, and then also the skull shape. The wild boar has a much elongated nose and a very flat front of the face, whereas the domestic pigs, it's more shortened and dish-shaped. So you can kind of see the difference, but then again, the hybrids can really range between those two ends. I think I'll just kind of skip the global distribution of wild boar and focus more on what's happening closer to home. So this is a bit of a Frankenstein map, combining some data from the US and Canada. So in the US, the term for wild boar tends to be, they tend to use feral swine. And that actually reflects a little bit of a difference in the number or the type of pigs they have down there. So their feral swine originally came to the US way back with the colonizers, and people actually brought over domestic breeds of pigs because they were bringing a food source. And so they have domestic breeds, and they were brought on the ships and then released to free range and provide a food source for the people moving into the colonies. And then later on, there was Eurasian wild boar brought over for hunting opportunities, and then some of those were also free ranged or escaped. And then there's the interbreeding. So the US has a feral swine population that has a lot more domestic genetics than what we see in Canada because of that initial introduction of the domestic breeds that became then feral. And so in Canada, we tend to use the term wild pigs. That's what the Canadian strategy has gone with. But here in Alberta, we tend to use the term wild boar because that's what's defined in our legislation, and also because the major type of pig, wild pig we have in Alberta and on the prairies is that classic Eurasian wild boar. They were brought in for farm diversification and primarily for meat production and some hunting. And it is really just that classic wild boar. That's not necessarily true for the rest of Canada. Some of the wild pigs that BC and Ontario are struggling with are actually escaped potbelly pigs that have established. So that's kind of the wild pig terminology there. So in terms of the legislation in Alberta, I mentioned we talk about wild boar, and they're a pest under the Pest Act and covered under the regulation as well. And so this means that landowners have to prevent the establishment and control or destroy them on their property. And wild boar are only a pest when they're at large. So there are 14 wild boar farms, give or take, still in Alberta. And they have to meet a certain minimum containment standard for their fencing to ensure that the wild boar will not escape. And so those wild boar are livestock, but once the wild boar escape and they're not contained, then they are a pest. And because they're a pest, they're not wildlife, and so there's no regulation around hunting. It is legal to hunt wild boar. There's no seasons, there's no limits, there's no licenses required. But you do need to keep in mind some of the other legislation. So for example, all of the firearms portions under the Wildlife Act relating to using firearms near residences or roads, from boats, planes, automobiles, and at night. Those are all just related to firearm use, not specifically hunting. So those apply to wild boar as well. To keep in mind access on public lands. And if you are trapping on public lands, then I would suggest talking to public lands around that, because it is a structure on a public land and you would likely require a permit and permission. Then for the private land access, again, the Trespass Act. And then I also like to mention, I think it's probably less relevant for this crowd, but closer to the city, I like to mention the Stray Animals Act and regulation, because escaped domestic pigs are not wild boar and they're not a pest, they're escaped livestock. And so they fall under the Stray Animals Act. So you can't shoot them and call it pest control. So then in terms of recognizing wild boar and their signs, this is an example of that classic Eurasian wild boar. Some of the distinguishing features really are the body shape. You'll see much bigger hips, bigger shoulders and narrower hips. Our domestic pigs tend to have the bigger hams that were bred for meat production. They'll also tend to be taller, so their legs are longer. They have the dark coat that's thicker, more wiry. Again, that face with the elongated nose, snout, and the flat front of the face, and erect ears. And then another good distinguishing feature, if you can see piglets, is that the piglets of wild boar are striped. There's only one domestic species that has striped piglets, which is the Manglisa pig. So otherwise, if you're seeing stripes, then you know that there's some wild boar genetics in those pigs. I put a picture of scat there, but it's not a great distinguishing feature. Since wild boar are omnivores, their scat can really vary quite a bit depending on what they eat. And we actually, in the department, have one wild boar scat detector dog, and then there's another one in environment and parks. And so they're trained to detect the scat using smell, because visually it can be very variable, so it's not a great definitive identification. I did put some tracks there as well. They're quite similar to deer tracks. The distinguishing features are really that they're more rounded in the toe. And then also the dew claws are outside of the main section of the track instead of in line with the hoof. So there's a couple of examples in mud and in snow. But again, if the track isn't sort of a great track, if it's filled in with snow or it's rained on, then it might be difficult to be definitive about that. So I think really the way to recognize if wild boar are present in the landscape is more what they're doing to the land than their sign directly. So wallowing is a behavior that wild boar use to cool down and also for parasite control, and it leaves some pretty evident wallows in the environment. These are all examples from Alberta. And that's quite damaging to the wetlands. So if they're on the edge of wetlands, they can be fouling the water, contaminating the water because they're urinating and pooping in the water. They're also stirring up the soil, so it causes a lot of erosion and it introduces invasive species. And a lot of, because of the more turbidity in the water, a lot of species that might be using that for reproduction, the environment might not be suitable anymore. So quite damaging, the wallowing, but a really good identifier that wild boar are in the area. Rooting is another thing that you'll see when there's wild boar in the area. That's the behavior they use predominantly for feeding. The two pictures on the left of the screen are from Alberta. The one on the right in the pasture is from Manitoba. And that was a huge area of the pasture that was rooted. We were able to meet with the farmer and sort of hear a bit about his experience raising cattle in a wild boar area. So that's quite damaging. And again, there's just the rooting causes a lot of erosion. It compacts the soil in areas. It introduces and allows for weeds to grow. And then if it's in agricultural fields, it creates a hazard for the machinery as well, because some of that machinery is just not meant to be going through this rutted area. A good chance to pause and talk about diet as well, since rooting is predominantly for feeding. So wild boar eat pretty much anything that fits in their mouth. They'll eat all the roots and shoots and bulbs that they're unearthing from the ground. They'll eat all the parts of the plant, from the bark to the berries to the nuts that are produced in the leaves. They'll eat earthworms, insects, small mammals, eggs, pretty much anything that they can get their mouth around. And then, of course, all of our agricultural products, stored feed, standing corn, and all of the crops on the ground as well. Something else you might come across are nests. So the one on the left is probably a farrowing nest where they would have, a sow would have had her young. And the one on the right is more of just a short-term use bedding area, but you'll see these nests where they dig up the ground and there's grasses exposed there. And so it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about their life cycle. The groups that wild boar travel in are called sounders, and those are primarily made up of sows and then potentially multiple generations of their young. The adult males tend to hang out in groups of males or in individuals, and they sort of move around the area where the sounders are located. Females can become reproductive around 13 months of age, give or take, depending on the conditions and how much food's available. And they will have litters of, on average, 6 piglets. And they're just like domestic pigs. Their gestation is 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. So they can actually be having multiple litters a year. And we do see that. Some research from the University of Saskatchewan has shown that on the prairies, we're having multiple litters a year. So their reproductive rate is just enormous. Just the amount of reproduction they can have is way above anything that our native ungulates, deer, moose, and elk would have. So I think we kind of covered some of how they are quite damaging through the rooting and wallowing. These are some more pictures that are more agriculture focused in terms of some of the damage they can do. And they can really damage the crop at all phases of growth. So on the far left, that picture is not from Alberta, but we have had some anecdotal sort of stories shared with us from folks in the Northwest that have had this happen, where they've seeded and then the wild boar come in the night after that, and they just follow along and dig up all the seeds. So I think in the US, they see that a lot with corn and peanuts, but we actually see it here in Alberta with peas as well. And I imagine potentially corn. We just maybe haven't heard where it's all happening. And then the standing corn, which is a popular way for sort of overwintering cattle, is also a popular way for wild boar to overwinter. It provides the food and the shelter, and they can just sort of spend their winter in that corn. And then you can see the example in the canola. It's not right in the canola, but it's along the edge, just how much it resembles a rototiller when wild boar kind of move through there. They also compete with and eat our native wildlife. They can push deer out of good habitat away from food, and kind of our ground nesting birds are at risk along with some of the other wildlife we have. And then they also carry disease and parasites, and they can transmit foodborne illnesses. And so these are all things that can affect people and animals. And I won't spend too much time on the disease, but I think the one that everybody's currently focused on primarily is African swine fever. I'm not sure how many folks in the audience tonight have pigs, but it's a disease that got a very high mortality rate. It's spreading globally. You can see from the map there. It's already spread through China, Russia, a lot of Europe, and South Africa. It made it quite close to North America and the Dominican Republic and Haiti in 2021, I believe. And so there's a lot of effort to keep it out of Canada and the US. It is a reportable disease. So if it was found in Canada, the pork industry, the market would be closed immediately. And so the pork industry would face a huge problem because we export around 70% of our pork. So that pork would have no place to go, and it would be a huge hit for the industry. So there's a big focus on planning for this, both to keep it out and then how to respond. And wild boar are a big risk for this disease because they can act as an uncontrolled vector that hosts the disease and can transfer it between backyard producers potentially that have pigs that are in pasture. So lots of work on that. And in terms of what we're trying to do, in addition to planning for African swine fever, we have the wild boar control program, which started sort of on the side of Perry Abramenko's desk way back in 2016 and grew and grew. And then in 2022 was sort of brought on as a full program that just like the rat control program, it's a permanent program. And there's a couple different parts. So one is enhanced monitoring and trapping. So these are reports we get from the public that we follow up on. In 2023, we had 104 reports. 37 of those, when we investigated, were determined to be escaped domestic pigs. And 33 we were able to confirm, or we believe were highly likely based on the evidence that it was wild boar. And the rest were just difficult to follow up with. When someone sees what they think is a wild boar as they're going down the highway at 120, it's kind of hard to follow up on that report sometimes. But where we do find that there's infestations based on these, we work with our trapping team through Alberta Pork to come in and remove the wild boar. And since 2018, when we started doing this, initially just with Perry, just a one-man trapping program, and now we have a team of 2 that's just amazing. They've removed 340 wild boar, and actually that number is out of date now because they removed a group in Woodlands County, 2 groups actually this weekend. So it's increased now. I think it must be around 350. I think it was 10 that they removed. So they're still kind of going strong. And I'll come back to the trapping in a minute because I know people are interested in that. We also have the modified bounty programs. There was the ear bounty program for 1 year that ended last March. And then there was a whole center trapping program that ran for 2 years, and that's ending this March. There's crop insurance. Wild boar are listed under the Wildlife Damage Compensation Program. So you can get crop insurance for wild boar damage to your crop, just like any other native ungulate species. And I mentioned that we have wild boar farms in Alberta, and we inspect those annually to ensure that their containment is meeting the minimum required standards. And then I just wanted to point out that Alberta is a very active participant in a lot of work that's happening throughout Canada and also into the US on wild boar. So we want to make sure that Alberta's at the table and we know what's going on and we know the people we can connect if we need things. And we're really learning a lot from what's been happening in the US, and they just have a ton of money and lots of people that they're putting towards this problem because it's way worse in the US, in the southern US, than it is in Canada. So we can learn a lot from that. And then we're also really collaborative. So our program is a collaboration between Alberta Pork, the Alberta Invasive Species Council, and Alberta Agriculture. And then we also work with a lot of different partners. Our main partner is the municipalities. So the ag fieldmen and all of the problem wildlife staff within the counties help us quite a bit. And then we also have a research study that we collaborate on with the University of Calgary Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. And they are taking all of our tissue samples from all the wild boar we've trapped and testing them for a variety of diseases that are have impacts on livestock, and to help us understand what the risk really is of the wild boar that are here. So we're really collaborative, and we're big on collaboration. So we're always looking to find more partners to help, because this problem is definitely not going to be solved by the government alone. That's for sure. So just to finish, I just want to speak a little bit about whole sounder trapping. So this is the approach that we've really relied on a lot since starting. Perry did quite a bit of work talking to folks down in the US to understand the best approach for controlling wild boar. And so far, we've really focused on whole sounder trapping, where we get the whole group. And I think these pictures kind of show why that approach is necessary. So the picture on the left is from Alberta. That was a group that was removed from woodlands in July of 2022, and I believe there was 22 individuals in that group. And then the one on the right is a similar group in Saskatchewan. So these groups of wild boar, if the conditions are good and the feed is available, they can get quite large. And so you can imagine the challenge of going in and removing through targeted shooting a group of that size. It would be very challenging, and likely some would escape. And the challenge with pigs, all pigs, for those that have domestic pigs as well, is that they're super smart and they learn very quickly. So if you have a chance at one and you don't get it, then you're probably not going to have another chance at it. It's learned something, and it's going to avoid human interactions and probably shift some nocturnal behavior, change its pattern of habitat use. And it's be very difficult to catch. So the key with the whole standard trapping is to get the whole group at once, so you don't end up educating some pigs that go on to cause bigger problems for you down the road. So this is our trap that we use. This is what I would call like the basic setup. So it's just a panels and then a gate, and the gate is remotely activated. So you can drop that gate with a cell phone from anywhere in the province with cell reception. And then the trapping team would set up a few, probably 2 or 3 cameras to see that trap from every angle, so that they can determine if they have the whole group in the trap. So when they find an area of infestation, they spend a lot of time scouting to determine the travel routes of the pigs and the best place for the trap, because it's really difficult to pull pigs too far away from their regular travel paths. So you really need to bring your trap to the pigs. Then they'll do quite a bit of pre-baiting to accustom the pigs to the area, and then also accustom the pigs to the trap, so that they're confidently going in and feeding, so that the whole group can get in there. And then they'll be able to drop the gate once they have the whole group. So when I say this is kind of the basic setup, they've put these traps where they weave them through trees. They also have had to put a second level of the panels on, because we've had wild boar jump over a 6-foot panel, and the snow on the top of the panel will be still there. They also have to account for in the winter, when the snowpack kind of starts to get packed inside the trap. All of a sudden your fencing is not as high as it was before it started snowing, so you have to account for that. I'm just trying to think of some other things that they've learned kind of the hard way, I guess I would say, over time. Winter is definitely a challenge. It's a good time to trap because your bait is worth more, and you're not competing with all the food available on the landscape during the spring and summer. But because of our Canadian climate, you get a lot of climate challenges. So the gate mechanism will freeze if you're not kind of on top of maintaining it, and then you're not able to drop the gate. Your batteries for all the cameras and the gate will drain more quickly. So there's sort of pros and cons, although in the winter you're not competing with the bears. So that's definitely a benefit. Other things they've learned is that the older sows tend to be the most wary, and they will go in the trap last. And so you really have to wait for that kind of educated, smart, seen it all sow to go in. And if you have males in the area, they will potentially keep a sounder out of a trap because they'll guard the bait. So often we have to remove those males in order to get the group. I think that's sort of the main things I can think about trapping, but I'm definitely happy to answer more questions about that. So then just kind of closing the presentation, I would just say that to stop wild boar, we really encourage people to report so that we can come in and do the whole sounder removal. There's a bunch of different ways to report. The Alberta Invasive Species Council does a great job with our outreach and education campaign, and they promote the Squeal on Pigs campaign. So you can report in a couple different ways. You can send an email, you can call 310 Farm. There's a form on the Alberta website. You can contact your municipality. And for those that are super savvy and like apps, you can use the EdMaps app to report wild boar. I also put my phone number and email there. I'm always happy to talk to people about wild boar if you have questions. And I know we really focus on the whole sounder removal. But I'd love to hear if you do shoot a wild boar, because it's helpful for us to understand where they are, so that we have a sense of where the issues are. So don't worry, don't feel like you're going to get a lecture on why you shouldn't have shot it, but just sharing the information is more important to me than anything else. And I also put there the Alberta Conservation Canine Unit. I didn't really talk about it in my presentation, but we do have a trained scat detector dog, Canine Seuss. He just turned 10, so he got a birthday post on our agriculture Facebook. But if you check out that website, there is a couple of videos of the dogs working there on their original project, which was the invasive mussels at boat inspection stations. And then there's one on wild boar as well. So there's lots of cute footage of the dogs working, but also some information on wild boar in Alberta as well that you might find interesting. And I think that's it for me. And I'm happy to take questions with the time that's left.
Anyone? Any questions for Hannah?
What is done with the removed hogs that you guys are trapping or whatever? Are you guys killing them off and sending them away, or are they just relocated, or what is your
Yeah,
goal?
good question. Yeah, we're not relocating. They're euthanized in the trap humanely, and then at the moment they're all being sent to our lab either in Edmonton or in Airdrie, and they get postmortemed, and a whole bunch of different tissue samples are taken that go to the University of Calgary. Yeah, so they all get euthanized. None of them are released. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I
Yeah,
was
good
just
question.
curious on that because obviously, like you said, I've seen them and I have shot at them, and you're 100% correct. If you miss one of them, chances are you're not going to see them for a long, long time again. So
Yeah, they like you get them off your property, but they'll just kind of go be a problem for someone else.
yeah,
Yeah,
go to the
yeah, they're
neighbor's
so smart. It's
instead.
crazy. Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah, that's all I got. Thanks.
yeah. It's great.
Any other questions for Hannah?
So yeah, I'm hoping to kind of connect with folks. I live just one county over in Minburn, but I'm hoping to connect more with everyone about wild boar because I know there was a lot of bounty returns in the historic bounty program in Vermilion River, and then looking at the map, like Ryan Brooks' data, which is the map that I showed. We kind of share a border with Saskatchewan in a place where there's a lot of wild boar on the Saskatchewan side as well, and so we kind of have this cross-border wild boar. And I'd really like to understand a little bit more about what's going on in this area because just with that Saskatchewan connection, their populations are kind of continuing to increase, and that could be a real issue for African swine fever with sort of a cross-border component to it. So it's kind of an area that I'd like to know more about what's going on here.
Yeah, I moved from Saskatchewan just 3 years ago, and where I was living, there was a pretty, I would say, I don't know a lot about it, but I would say there was a high population of them in the area that I was living. I was just northeast of Lloydminster, but I know even further south, like in the Hillmond country, like around Hillmond area, there was lots of them on my hunting cameras and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, you hear that every year. It seems like guys hunting and stuff like that, they see tons of them. So,
Yeah.
and even up in like the Clandonald area and stuff like that, I've heard lots in the last couple of years. And
Yeah. We're definitely in this like our kind of Two Hills, Vermilion River, Minburn, maybe even Wainwright is definitely one of the hot spots in the province, but it's because we kind of started like the hot spot in the province was sort of historically more like Lac St. Anne Woodlands area. And so we've been working there a lot longer. And so we're sort of realizing we need to pay some attention over here as well.
yeah, definitely.
Any other questions for Hannah? If not, Karen, you did have a question on rats and our current situation on rats in Alberta. Did you want to deal with that now?
Sure. Yeah, I just threw a couple slides together. I thought just visual is so much nicer than me just talking. So I'll do that. Can you just see the photo there, the first rat patrol? Yep. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I just thought I'd throw this one in because I'm not sure. This could be Vermilion River. It may or may not be. Just one of my favorite photos, taken around probably 1951 or so, of Napoleon Poulin, who was the first contractor for the rat control program. So somewhere along the border there. And I'm not sure how familiar anyone is there, but the program started in 1950 and the rat control zone was established right thereafter. So it's the first 3 townships westward from the Saskatchewan border, from Cold Lake all the way down to the Montana border. So, and it still exists today as well. We still do rat checks along the border. And so just as far as, I always like to make it clear to people too, when we talk about the program, people say rats. The two rats, the 2 species of rats that we're concerned about are the Norway rat. Most commonly, like historically, they come from Saskatchewan. And Wayne, when I mention Saskatchewan, I'm not trying to single out Saskatchewan as all our rat problems, but yeah, they do come. BC has a population as well. Most commonly, it's the roof rat that we have, and they hitch rides on vehicles from BC. But I just want to make it clear, those are the 2 species. And you can see, and these critters, I like to take photos of the dead rats. I collect them and keep them stored in my freezer in Airdrie. But you can see the Norway rat on the left is a bigger, it has a longer body with a shorter tail. And then the roof rat on the right has the longer tail than the body and shorter body compared to the Norway rat. But they're pretty close in total length. Historically, the program, when it first started, the concern was rural infestations. I just threw in a couple of these photos. This was the first investigation I went out on. You can see the holes around the old greenery there that has the wood floor. And then the photo on the right is the inside, where the rats chewed through the greenery to access the feed that was inside. So, yeah, so yeah, historically, I mean, the great thing is all of our farming practices have really advanced, and so there aren't, we don't have as many granaries out there. We shouldn't have any, really, very few that have a wooden floor. Barns are enclosed now as well. So, you know, the improvement in these farming practices has certainly helped for us to control rats and keep them out. Urban areas, I'll just speak to what we focus on in the urban areas now, or what we find is, as I said, with the roof rat, commonly hitches a ride on vehicles or holiday trailers as well. So that whole Okanagan area, I found a lot of people have come back, and I find most commonly in the summer, if they're coming back with their holiday trailer or their vehicle, they can have a rat hitch a ride. I'm not saying every vehicle does, but usually people go out to their garage after they return the next morning, and they'll find a dead rat in their garage. And somehow it survived that harrowing, 8-hour ride from the Okanagan area. When they arrive here, they're hot, dehydrated, they're hungry. And so quite often they hop off the vehicle and look for some food or water, but they usually perish quickly. And then, they could also be a pet rat that escaped, or I have instances where people buy frozen dead Norway rats to feed snakes, reptiles, and they don't dispose of them properly. They may just throw them outside off their balcony. So that does happen. I do get reports of that. You may have heard in the news in the fall, there was a report that we do have 2 infestations in Calgary. Both are at recycling facilities. They have been ongoing for a while. They've been a real challenge for us to control the rats in. As you can see, the photo on the left, that is kind of 1 day's worth of recycling product that's come in from the city of Calgary. So within that blue box material, other times there is food, there are containers that are not cleaned out properly. So the rats essentially have a constant source of food. The photo on the right just shows they're called Lego blocks. They're big cement blocks. And the rats can live in these because they can crawl up into them and the inside is hollow. So that is where they were able to nest and go undetected. So yeah, I just like to point that out. As far as how the infestations they're going really well. We are working with Lincoln Poulin, the grandson of Napoleon Poulin, who owns the business still, and he does have shops in Calgary and Edmonton. And what we kind of realized as we were into this for a little while was that we don't have a lot of expertise for rat control, particularly in urban areas within the pest control industry. And certainly, it's not something I learned a lot about. The history of our program has not been focusing on urban areas. So we were fortunately able to have Lincoln Poulin become involved in both of these facilities, his company services, and he comes out every couple months to monitor. But we've greatly reduced the numbers of rats in them. So I'm confident that we will have them eradicated here. I would think probably, hopefully by the end of the year, if not sooner. But there always is the threat of bringing them in from out of province. Landfills, again, some of you may remember the 2010, 2012 it was, I think, yeah, that the big infestation happened at the Medicine Hat landfill. And that, again, you can see that's a very challenging environment because they can go undetected in that area and they have a source of food constantly. It did take 2 years, but we were successful in eradicating that infestation as well. And I just like to talk a bit about reporting because we have an email set up now, 310rats@gov.ab.ca, that we encourage people to report rat sightings to and include a photo. We used to have the phone number and discontinued that a couple years because really email is, if people can send a photo in, then I can determine right away whether it is a rat and we need to respond to it. People can still phone into 310 Farm though as well. And because Alberta is rat-free, we've never had established populations of rats. People quite often mistake other critters, rodents, for rats. The number one offender is the muskrat down on the left-hand side there. I mean, he's a larger rodent, quite often seen traveling a fair distance from water. And I think that kind of makes people think that it could be a rat. But then, the mice, the bushy-tailed wood rat or pack rat, voles, as well as the pocket gopher. And here I just put in some stats. These are the last 4 years since I took over the program. I keep a big spreadsheet of my confirmed rats and my non-rat reports. And you can see there, muskrats are usually 50% of the total reported. I just did my 2023 results and we had 450 reports. And here's just another graph. It kind of breaks down the species that are reported to us from 2023 and the confirmed rats within that as well. Most of my confirmed rats are the single rats. And then I have rural versus urban as well, as far as the confirmed rats. So 73% of my total rat reports were urban. And again, that's mainly those ones that have hitched rides on the vehicles. And yeah, and I should just mention too, a lot of people really question the rat-free status that we have. And what that means, and what I always explain to people is that it doesn't mean that rats don't get into the province. I can't stop that from happening. What it means is that we respond. So we have the program. And we work to ensure that they don't establish permanently. And that's it. That's all I was going to say. If there's any questions.
Well, thanks, Karen, for updating us on that. This last call for any questions. If not, I'd really like to thank Karen and Shelley and Hannah for all joining us tonight and presenting about some of our pests and giving, I guess, some good ideas on what to watch for, you know, how to identify and what we're looking at and what some of the potential risks are, as well as some control options. So say thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for attending tonight. If not, thank you, and have a good rest of your evening.